My lesson will focus on politeness and specifically on politeness when making requests. According to Silsey, Murcia, and Allstein, politeness deals with perception, expectations, and conventional realizations of communicative strategies which enhance social harmony. In acquiring one's first language, a person also acquires these rules of politeness as part of one's sociocultural and pragmatic competence. When learning a second language, one needs to acquire the new culture's politeness framework, which is often very different from that of one's own culture. They further explain that politeness often relates to the degree of directness expressed in speech acts, with indirect speech acts generally perceived to be more polite. One way to make requests more indirect is to turn them into questions. According to Daniel Eskin, a request becomes fundamentally less direct when it shifts to a question and makes use of some modal form. So, where imperative forms are considered the most direct, interrogative forms are considered the most indirect. In this lesson, students will learn about different ways to make requests more polite. They will then engage in an activity that will allow them to practice making requests in real-life situations. The primary skill that we will focus on in this lesson is speaking. The objectives are for students to recognize the importance of politeness in making requests, understand what makes a request be perceived as polite, and have concrete phrases and techniques for making polite requests. I will start the lesson by asking students to find a partner and engage in some casual discussion. I will ask them to answer the following questions. 1. Think about a time when you felt someone was being rude. What did they say? What about their language or tone made you think they were rude? And 2, have you had an interaction where you were the one who was perceived as rude? What did you say that was perceived as rude? How did you feel when you realized you had offended the other person? The goal of this initial discussion will be to activate some prior knowledge about politeness and to emphasize the importance of understanding politeness within the context of the English language. I will then introduce the lesson by discussing how requests can be perceived as polite or impolite depending on the speaker's word choice. I'll present the following charts and review the words and techniques that can be used to make a request more polite. This first chart shows some examples of requests listed in order from most direct and therefore least polite to most indirect and therefore most polite. After presenting this chart, I will ask students for feedback as to what they think makes each of these utterances polite or impolite. This may spark a discussion about U.S. sociocultural and communication norms, which I feel is equally as important to the understanding of polite versus impolite language. This second chart offers some internal modifications that can also help soften the speaker's intent through the use of particular syntactic, phrasal, and lexical forms. According to Economidou Cogditis, downgrading is considered a key pragmalinguistic feature of politeness. After the class seems to have a good grasp of the material, we will move to the activity, which will ask the students to apply some of these newly learned techniques to real-life situations. Each student will receive a note card that describes a situation for which the student has to make a polite request. For example, you're in your English class. Your teacher has just explained an important concept, but you are not sure you understood. Ask her to repeat it. Students will stand up and find a peer to make their request. The peer will assess if the request was polite enough and explain why or why not. If it wasn't polite enough, the pair can brainstorm ways to make the request more polite. After the pair is finished discussing the first request, the second person can make their request and repeat the process. When both students have made their requests, they will move on and find another classmate to repeat the process. The activity is over when every student has shared and received requests from and with 3 people. To solidify the new information, each student will also complete a worksheet that will contain a list of the situations that were given in the note cards. Students will work independently to complete the worksheet. To encourage the students to apply what we have learned in this lesson, I will ask them to practice using some of these techniques as they go about their day and come back with a real-life example that they can share at the beginning of next class. That concludes my mini lesson presentation. Thank you for watching.